Thunderbirds are go.
The story so far. AP Films, producer of television Stingray, move on to their next production before anyone has actually seen it. The next show is to be called International Rescue, until Gerry Anderson renames it Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds will be a series of half-hour episodes, except for the first one, which for now forgotten reasons was an hour. Blue Grade saw this pilot and said, "That's not a television series, that's a feature film." Yes, we know some of you claim Gerry was mixing his anecdotes, and Lou apparently said this about Space 1999 too. But he did commission a feature film of Thunderbirds, which does rather suggest that he thought it was, a feature film. Blue Grade saw the pilot and said, "That's a feature film. You need to make them all an hour." "Oh," said Gerry, "but we shot several others at an hour." "I don't care," said Lou. "Can we have any more time?" said Gerry. "No, you're still going out next September," said Lou. At this point, at Christmas 1964, the following episodes had been shot, or were shooting, in the 25-minute format. Pit of Peril, City of Fire, Sun Probe, The Uninvited, The Mighty Atom, Vault of Death, Operation Crash Dive, and Move and You're Dead. It's now after Christmas, January 1965, and the crew have had no choice but to continue shooting half-hour episodes because they don't have any hour scripts. And they don't have any time to stop because they're still out in September. So they're now making their problems even worse by creating further episodes that will need to be added to later. So now we have Pit of Peril, City of Fire, Sun Probe, The Uninvited, The Mighty Atom, Vault of Death, Operation Crash Dive, Move and You're Dead, and Martian Invasion, and Brink of Disaster. Over 6 months into production, and with 9 months to go to transmission, AP Films has gone from 9 episodes in the can to 1. Only Trapped in the Sky is ready, and even that'll be seen in Dutch first.
We halen het niet. De baan is te kort.
Each half-an-hour episode had 2 weeks on the shooting stage, with 2 episodes in production simultaneously, which means that every month AP Films could shoot,
Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it's 4.
Now, if the crew were to produce hour episodes, this would mean the rate of production would have to change, meaning that each month they could only produce
7, 8, 9, 10.
2. 2 directors on, 2 off.
The shooting schedule then became a month. So you were a month on the floor and a month, supervising the editing and going over your script and having your meetings.
I just felt that it was a nicer way to live, to be off for that length of time to prepare.
It did relieve a lot of pressure.
It didn't seem very fair to everybody else, though, that they were still all having to
day in and day out, yeah.
For, every day,
But
whereas
they enjoyed
we
it.
were getting a bit more time to ourselves to prepare everything.
Now, what follows is pure speculation, but it would seem that it was not just a case of clunk, click, we're now producing our episodes, but that a transitional phase was needed. And that transitional phase seems to occur through January to April 1965, when The Perils of Penelope and Terror in New York City were in production. These episodes would be unusual, in that they weren't half-hour episodes that would be expanded much later, nor were they hour episodes off the bat. Instead, they expanded during production, and for this task, all hands were on deck, with 2 directors doing one half, 2 weeks, and the other 2 directors doing the other half, also 2 weeks. This seems to be the studio's way of easing into the new production schedule. Anyway, end speculation for the moment. The Perils of Penelope and Terror in New York City are, despite this unusual method of production, 2 of the best episodes of the series, with both showcasing all the strengths of the team. And naturally, with 4 directors, everyone will be scrambling to take the credit, won't they? Sir, did you direct The Perils of Penelope?
Excuse me, please. I must go.
Did you direct Terror in New York City? Excuse me, could you tell me about Terror in...
Perhaps I'll get some peace and quiet now.
Now, Alan Patillo was unique in that he didn't deny or play down his involvement in Perils. He was, after all, the credited scriptwriter, although Sylvia once claimed she didn't have a lot to do with Thunderbird 6, despite being the credited producer and scriptwriter and lead actress. But the other 3, Desmond Saunders, David Elliott and David Lane, well, they all saw it as the other bloke's film.
Didn't I tell you this was gonna be a great picture?
The Perils of Penelope and Terror in New York City are not unique in having 2 directors. We know, for instance, that Alan Patillo directed Sunprobe and The Mighty Atom in 1964, but the final on-screen credit goes to David Lane, even though the official story guide still credits Patillo, at least for Sunprobe. And this may be true for other episodes too, as David Lane explains.
If I remember rightly, they staggered the making of the first 9 editions, but you were shooting and prepping a new hour show while you were trying to shoot and pick up on the half-hour shows. So it was a very messy period, but I don't think any of them looked like they were padded to an hour.
All the other joint episodes are credited to a single director apiece, and no one remembers how they decided who would get the final credit.
Oh well, down the hatch.
Drink. Beg pardon, milady, but the drink was drugged.
Oh dear, how tiresome. It looks such a pretty Perno too.
The Perils of Penelope is the first time that her ladyship was given a leading role, whereas previously writer Dennis Spooner had been inclined to send the character up.
You see, we're going quite smoothly now.
Oh, we are, madam, but backwards.
Alan Patillo was much more in tune with Sylvia's vision for the character.
She was this lady that everyone thought was just as she was. Twinset and Pearls. My favourite book of all time was The Scarlet Pimpernel. I love the idea of someone by day being this person and by night being something else. It just caught my imagination. By day, she was the lady of the manor doing her prison visits. And so that brought her in touch with the criminal, if you like, the likeable rogues, we have to call them. And that's how she met Parker. No one knew that she was involved with the international rescue, anything like that. I had the situation where I could write the characters, the women characters, but keep them up to date. Of course, at the beginning, you'd be walking 10 paces behind the male lead. So I thought it was very old-fashioned, and it wouldn't reflect the audience that we were getting. So bit by bit, I think I reflected what was happening in the outside world, and it was also happening in my life.
The Perils of Penelope began life as a half-hour script in 1964, and the plot probably looked something like this. And we say probably, as we now know from Pit of Peril and Vault of Death, that huge elements could be altered or dropped during expansion, meaning it's not just a case of cutting down the hour episode. Anyway, the story so far. Lady Penelope meets up with old friend Sir Jeremy Hodge in Paris. He's been working on experiments to convert seawater into fuel with his old colleague Professor Borrender, who has suddenly disappeared following a conference in Paris. He boarded the express to Andabad, but never arrived at his destination. Penelope and Sir Jeremy board the express in search of Borrender, while Parker and Thunderbird 2 head to Andabad to meet them at the other end. When the train enters the tunnel, the power is cut, and Penelope and Sir Jeremy are taken hostage by the villainous Dr. Godber, who wants the secrets of the seawater conversion process. To get the information out of Borrender and Sir Jeremy, he ties Penelope to a ladder and lowers her into the tunnel to await the next train. When Penelope and Sir Jeremy fail to arrive at their destination, Gordon and Virgil enter into the tunnel, where a shootout breaks out to save Penelope before it is too late.
Here it comes.
Now, let's look at the additions, starting with the most obvious. The almost gratuitous use of nearly 5 minutes from Sunprobe, shot in 1964, including shots that were unused in the final edit of Sunprobe. Although Perils of Penelope was completed second and broadcast third, maybe Sunprobe uses gratuitous amounts of footage from the Perils of Penelope. Or is it the other way around? Sunprobe was shot fourth, but was the 11th episode finished and broadcast? And while we're on the subject of Sunprobe, the music to accompany the launch of the rocket, which was shot circa October 1964, was composed for the Perils of Penelope, shot early 1965. So as you can all see, it's perfectly simple. The footage from the opening sequence isn't entirely lifted from Sunprobe. Additional material with a reporter was shot, with a singularly bizarre explanation for the name of the rocket.
Only a few moments remain, viewers, before we see the liftoff of Sunprobe, so named because its enormous power would enable it to fly into the sun on full power.
Plus the footage of Sir Jeremy and Professor Borrender watching. Originally, it was seen we never saw the rocket that was powered by seawater, as the sequence where Penelope and Sir Jeremy talk in the back of Fab 1 was altered after it was originally shot. As originally intended, it would have run like this.
In the wrong hands, this process could contaminate the oceans of the world.
And the consequences to mankind could be pretty terrifying. Now I understand your precautions.
You must help me find the professor, dear lady.
Of course, and we've got to work fast. We're up against men who will stop at nothing.
But in the transmitted version, it looks like this. Watch for the change of lighting and puppet positions.
In the wrong hands, this process could contaminate the oceans of the world.
And the consequences to mankind could be pretty terrifying. Now I understand your precautions.
I don't think you do. Not completely. You'll remember the launch last week of the new Sun probe rocket.
Don't tell me that rocket was launched on your new fuel.
It was indeed. So apart from the dangers I've mentioned, it's possible that the discovery could upset the balance of power and start a world war.
International Rescue owes you a great debt, Sir Jeremy. We are at your service. What would you like us to do?
You must help me find the professor, dear lady.
Of course, and we've got to work fast. We're up against men who will stop at nothing.
The heraldic archive sequence also seems to have been added, and the road sign saying Rue Desmond hints that this may have been one of Desmond Saunders' contributions to the episode. Although it's atmospheric and gives rise to one of the show's greatest lines.
I say, open this door at once. We're British.
It is something of a cul-de-sac for the plot. This might then suggest that the section where Sir Jeremy orders his extraordinarily gluttonous breakfast, so that Parker may positively identify Godber as also additional.
I'd like to order my breakfast for the morning. I want orange juice, cereal with plenty of sugar, some eggs and bacon, and some strong coffee and cream. Is that quite clear?
Perfectly, monsieur.
I'd be in a coma after eating that up. Of course, having ascertained that Godber is dodgy, Sir Jeremy and Lady Penelope then do absolutely nothing with this information, so they probably deserve to get caught. Barry Gray's timing notes indicate that Reel 3 was also watered after his initial viewing, this time to include the scene of Scott returning from holiday. Though who knows where you park Thunderbird 1 in Ibiza. It would seem that alterations were being made as the episode was being pieced together, which was not unusual for AP films during 1965. David Lane remembers Attack of the Alligators being put together in such a fashion. And editor Tony Sloman, who worked at the studio for a few weeks to help with the excess load, remembers having to piece together sequences from other episodes, or even having to request extra shots from the stage in order to make certain sections work. Not all alterations were in pursuit of narrative perfection, though. At night on the Ahmedabad Express, Penelope is seen to be wearing a blue nightie. However, eagle-eyed viewers may notice that in 3 shots, she is wearing peach nightclothes. This was almost certainly reshot at Sylvia's behest, as she kept a close eye on Penelope's wardrobe and overall style. She would later ask for sequences to be reshot for Thunderbirds 6 for a similar reason. Curiously, thanks to a Spanish sticker book from the 1960s, we are able to see how Penelope looked in the original nightie, as the album makes use of a series of film trims from the cutting room floor. This not only shows us how the sequence looked before reshooting, but gives us a tantalising glimpse of other shots and scenes which were deleted from the final episode. The music for The Perils of Penelope was recorded on Thursday, the 18th of March 1965, at CTS Studios, Wembley. And according to the final negative, the episode was completed in April. Well, until someone decides to change the end titles in September. But bar that alteration, APF now had a second episode in the can. 2 down, 24 to go, 5 months to transmission.
Okay, everybody, back on the set.
Terror in New York City, written by the ever-reliable Alan Fennell, was hot on its heels, though, as the 3rd episode to be completed, albeit the 13th episode to enter production. Like Perils, this was an episode that began life as a half-hour story, but entered production in the knowledge that by hook or by crook, it would be an hour at the other end. No record of the original proposed half-hour storyline survives, so let's have a speculative look at how the story originally unfolded. The story so far, maybe. Thunderbirds 1 and 2 are returning to base when the USN Sentinel mistakenly identifies Thunderbird 2 as a hostile craft. Following a brutal missile attack, which Jeff fortunately manages to get aborted, the crippled transporter craft makes it back to the island before crash landing, leaving it and its pilot out of action. Meanwhile, in New York, Bratch reporter Ned Cook is covering the relocation of the Empire State Building to make way for modern development. The Tracy family watch on television and see the disastrous spectacle of the New York skyscraper suddenly collapse into rubble, trapping Ned Cook and his cameraman Joe in an underground cavern, which is slowly filling with water. With Thunderbird 2 out of commission, International Rescue are powerless to help, until Virgil hits on the idea of getting the Sentinel to transport Thunderbird 4 to the danger zone. It's now a race against time, as the yellow submarine has to make its way to New York before Ned and Joe are drowned by the rising water levels. In the nick of time, Ned and Joe are saved, and a short time later, Ned issues his thanks to International Rescue on his television show, unaware that they're all there in the audience, leaving Kirano to do all the rescuing himself. If this is right, it would indicate that the initial scenes at the oil well were late script additions, and would explain why Ned and Scott don't address later in the episode that they've had a previous run.
Crazy fools.
Jeff's letter turning down his invitation must surely also be a late addition, as it adds nothing to the plot that isn't explained elsewhere. In fact, international broadcasters often considered it so pointless, most countries didn't bother dubbing it. The former finance building may also have been a late shooting addition. The building itself isn't visible prior to its mention. Even the characters seem unaware of its presence.
Fulmer Finance? Now, which building is that?
That one.
The one at an angle, shaking violently, perhaps? The scenes where Scott refers to the building were also shot at another time, as the background rubble is different, and he's sitting at the other mobile control set, which has, amongst other things, a different microphone. Other than in an earlier filmed wide shot, the second policeman vanishes too at this point, with all dialogue given to his colleague, who is now shot entirely in close-up.
I guess you heard that.
By April 1965, after much toing and froing, the episode was edited and ready for Barry Gray to view, and time ahead of writing his score. This was recorded on Monday, the 5th of April 1965 at CTS Studios in Wembley, and included a handful of cues dropped for the final edit, including this rather nice section intended to sit with this piece of the action.
Hey, Gordon, any signal from them yet?
Afraid not, Scott.
Keep going. We've got to find them.
After the music had been recorded, the episode was dubbed, and the sound and picture negatives were cut. Trapped in the Sky, The Perils of Penelope, and Terror in New York City were now ready for transmission. 3 of the great Thunderbirds episodes were ready to go. When Terror was complete, it was now time to finally confront the original 1964 half hours, which needed picking apart and putting back together. First up was Pit of Peril, which entailed a lot more heartache. The Perils of Penelope shows the brilliance of Alan Patillo, who wrote the original script and directed over half the episode, including the climactic shootout, one of the best filmed and edited sequences from the entire series. Terror in New York City, though, showcases how well a studio picture can work, where everyone is dedicated to their job. For although neither director claims credit to it, it is easily one of the most memorable episodes of the series, with a brilliant score, dynamic editing, an action-packed script, and above all, memorable visuals. To rework the series into a new hour format was no easy feat. After all, it could so easily have come crashing down around them. Next time, we'll be looking at the third episode to enter production, City of Fire, and with the help of an incomplete half-hour script, we'll see how an episode that began life in late 1964 became an hour a whole year later.
Wow!